The development and rise of the Lydian civilization began along a river. The name of this river is the Pactolus. In the 600s BCE, the Pactolus River in Lydia provided the region with an alloy of gold and silver, a mixture crafted by nature itself. It's called electrum. It has a yellowish pale natural luster, and that luster changed the course of human history, because the people living along the banks of this river took that electrum and invented money, one of the most revolutionary ideas in history. But this story isn't just about the invention of money. It also tells the story of how the civilization that invented money became the world's wealthiest nation, only to fall victim to the very system it had created just as it reached its peak. How people who come into money end up ruined. Again, because of money. In the early 600s BCE, when someone went to the main market of Sardis in the early morning hours, the scents of spices, tanned leather, and dyed fabrics wafted toward them from the caravans. They made eye contact with merchants who were in town for a final stop and would try to make out the languages of the people haggling, one in Aramaic, one in Greek, and another in Phrygian. As you can see, Sardis was no ordinary city. Sardis was the capital of the Kingdom of Lydia, and this kingdom was situated in one of the world's most strategic locations. Lydia serves as a bridge between the east and the west. It lies in the heart of Anatolia, right at the crossroads of trade routes. All routes leading from Mesopotamia to the Aegean and from the Black Sea to Egypt had to pass through Lydian territory in one way or another. This geography gave Lydia three key advantages. The first of these resources is the soil. Thanks to the river valleys, agriculture in Lydia was extremely productive. The Hermos and Pactolus rivers nourished the farmland and boosted production. The first requirement of a strong kingdom is the ability to feed its people, and for Lydia, this was never a problem. The crown jewel among these strengths was the trade routes. Goods coming from the east had to pass through Lydian territory before reaching the west. Indeed, anyone wishing to travel through these lands had to pay a tax, and anyone wishing to trade had to stop in Sardis. This was not only a geographical advantage, but also a political bargaining chip against other countries. Third, the most important force that inspired us to make this video is gold. The electrum carried by the Pactolus River determined the fate of Lydia. This isn't just a valuable mineral. As we'll see later, it was the raw material for an entirely new idea. To understand the importance of electrum, one must understand how trade was conducted at that time. For example, let's say you have some wheat. You need a pot made by a craftsman. The craftsman comes over and says, "Sure, if you have wheat, I can give you a pot." You agree, and you trade the wheat for the pot. But this system only works for small communities. As cities grow and trade becomes more complex, this method starts to cause serious problems. The problem seems simple but unsolvable. You have to find someone who needs exactly what you want to buy. And that person has to be selling exactly what you need. Economists call this the double coincidence problem. In other words, there must be a two-way match of needs. In large cities where hundreds of different professions coexist, this system simply doesn't work. And merchants were looking for a solution to this problem. The Lydians recognized this problem and came up with an idea that changed the course of history. They made small, standardized pieces out of electrum. They shaped each one to a specific weight and stamped them with the lion's head, the symbol of the kingdom. This seal declared, "The value of this piece is guaranteed. It is backed by an authority." You have to stop for a moment to realize just how revolutionary this idea was. Value no longer lay in the physical object itself, but in the security it provided. A piece of cloth or a piece of metal is useless on its own. But if everyone believes it has a certain value, it suddenly becomes a universal medium of exchange that can buy anything. By making state authority the source of this security, the Lydians brought about what is perhaps the greatest economic innovation in human history. The first coins were minted in the 7th century BCE. Today, the earliest examples of these have been found in the foundations of the Temple of Artemis. They were small, somewhat irregular in shape, and their edges were not perfectly round, but the idea they conveyed was complete. The mint was established. Weighing standards were established. The system began to operate. Imagine a merchant in Sardis. He has gold and silver, but every time he has to weigh them and have their purity tested. This is both time-consuming and creates trust issues. Arguments arise, with people asking, "Is this gold really as pure as you say it is?" The coin put an end to the argument. When you see a coin bearing the state seal, the debate is over. Its value in terms of wheat is predetermined. Bargaining is only about the price, not the value. That's a big difference. Trade picked up speed. A transaction that used to take half a day was reduced to just a few minutes. Markets expanded. The number of merchants coming to Sardis increased. The city grew even wealthier. And this system began to spread. First, it spread to neighboring Greek cities. These cities began minting their own coins. Then it spread to the Aegean Islands. Then to mainland Greece. Within a few centuries, similar systems emerged across a region stretching from India to Britain. As the age of barter gradually faded into history, the age of money began, and Lydia was the architect of this era. In 560 BC, a young man named Croesus ascended the Lydian throne. Having become king upon the death of his father, Alyattes, he inherited a kingdom that was already wealthy when he took the throne. But during his reign, Lydia reached an entirely new level of wealth. The phrase "as rich as Croesus" is still used today. This man, who had become a symbol of wealth over the centuries, was indeed one of the wealthiest rulers of his time. The gold from the Pactolus River was constantly processed and turned into coins. But Croesus took it a step further. He separated the gold from the silver. Instead of electrum, he minted coins of pure gold and pure silver. This system paved the way for a more reliable and universal monetary system. The foundation of the monetary system we use today was laid at that point. Croesus' wealth was not measured solely by the gold in his treasury. Croesus made enormous donations to the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. According to some estimates, 117 gold ingots and countless silver objects. He sent gifts to Egypt, Sparta, and Athens. These gifts were not only a sign of generosity but also a display of power. In a way, they conveyed the message, "If I wanted to, I could buy you." Over time, Sardis began to grow, the palace expanded, and temples were erected. The city planning was far ahead of its time. The defensive walls were reinforced, water channels were constructed, and marketplaces were established. The great philosophers of the time visited Croesus' palace. It is said that Solon traveled from Athens to Sardis and had his famous dialogue with Croesus. Croesus asks, "Who is the happiest person in the world?" Solon points not to the rich and powerful king, but to ordinary Athenians and Argives. "You cannot claim happiness until life is over," he says. Croesus did not understand this answer, or perhaps he did not want to understand it. When Croesus ascended the throne, the world was changing. In the east, a new power was rising on the Persian plateau. Cyrus the Great, or as he is commonly known, Cyrus the Great, first defeated the Medes. Then he conquered Babylon. Then he turned his attention westward. This man was no ordinary conqueror. Historians described him as an enlightened despot. He showed respect for the religions and traditions of the peoples he conquered. He sent the exiled Jews back to their homeland. He established a flexible system of government capable of uniting diverse peoples. And he sustained his army through loyalty rather than money. When Croesus heard of the Persian threat, the first thing he did was seek an oracle. He sent an envoy to Delphi. His question was straightforward. "What will happen if I attack the Persians?" She gave Pythia's famous reply, "If you go to war, a great empire will fall." Croesus was delighted. In his eyes, the great empire was, of course, the Persian Empire. He rewarded the oracle. He began preparing for the campaign. In fact, the prophecy had a dual meaning. The great empire could have been Lydia as well. The spring of 547 BC, Croesus assembled his army. This army consisted largely of mercenaries, Egyptians, Greeks, and Carians. The people of his own country were wealthy and didn't want to fight. Why should they risk their lives? Life was good for them. That's why foreign soldiers were hired. People who fought not for the flag, but for money. The battle began near Tyria. By evening, neither side had emerged victorious. Both sides withdrew. Croesus sent a messenger to the Lydian mercenaries. The message was short and to the point. "Fight for me, and I'll pay you more." The mercenaries weren't here for a flag. They were here for money. And Cyrus was offering more money. The soldiers switched sides. In an instant, everything changed. Money had brought them together, and money drove them apart. This scene is not merely a case of military betrayal. It is a perfect demonstration of the nature of money. Money does not buy loyalty, it buys temporary service. And that service lasts only until a better offer comes along. Croesus retreated. He took refuge behind the thick walls of Sardis. The city was besieged. Days and weeks passed. Croesus was still waiting, but his allies did not come. The walls were strong. They might have held, but a Persian soldier discovered that a section of the fortress could be scaled thanks to the slope of the rock face. The Lydians had left this spot unguarded. It was so steep that they hadn't thought anyone would come from there. After a 14-day siege, Sardis fell. Croesus was captured. Cyrus had a fire lit to kill him. According to legend, Croesus groaned over the flames, crying out Solon's name. Croesus wondered, who is this Solon? When he heard the story, he regretted his actions and forgave Croesus. Historians are still debating whether this story is true. But there is a lesson to be learned from this event. You can share what you've learned from this episode with other viewers who are interested in financial history. The treasure of Sardis was transferred to the Persian treasury. In 547 BC, the Kingdom of Lydia was wiped from the pages of history. Just as Sardis's treasure was transferred to the Persian treasury, the ideas left behind by Lydia were passed on to future civilizations. Cyrus and the Persian rulers who followed him adopted the monetary system. They minted their own coins, but did so using the system established by the Lydians: weight standards, coin stamping, and state guarantees. All of these continued. Only the symbols on the coins changed. The Greeks adopted and developed this system. Athens' owls, silver tetradrachms bearing the image of an owl, became the common currency of Mediterranean trade. In Macedonia, Alexander the Great carried the Lydian legacy to India. Rome established the economic backbone of the empire with the gold aureus and the silver denarius. The Ottoman akçe, the Venetian ducat, and the British pound are all extensions of the same concept: a standardized universal unit of value backed by the state. And the coins in your pocket today feature a seal on the metal that is a modern version of the Lydian lion. So where did Croesus go wrong? Was it in misinterpreting a prophecy? Yes, that was a mistake. But there was an even bigger mistake. Croesus fully understood money as an economic tool, but he failed to grasp the difference between money and loyalty. He thought he could buy anything with gold, and that misconception ruined him. Croesus's mistake was to use money as a substitute for loyalty. He misread human nature. People work for money, but they don't die for it. He would die for values, for beliefs, for a sense of belonging. The Lydia army lacked this, and that absence weighed heavier than all that gold and silver. The coins in your pocket. With every purchase, every payment, every time that little piece of metal changes hands, you are part of a story that began on the banks of the Pactolus. 2,500 years ago, that electrum glistening in a riverbed shaped the economic architecture of human history. Lydia has fallen. Sardis lies in ruins today. All that remains of Croesus's palace are its stone foundations. But the idea they left behind, that value is based on trust, that state authority gives money its meaning, and that a standard unit of value enables free trade, has not been dismantled. We still use the same system today, only the symbols have changed. What was Croesus's biggest mistake? Please post your answer to this question in the comments. We'll use your answers to decide the topic of our next video. Where should the story of financial history go next? The power of money, or the limits of money? It all began by a river, the Pactolus. The 600s BC Lydia. A glimmer beneath the water, and the world was never the same again.